afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another TeTra seminar, today with Lewis Reed. He is currently a researcher and lecturer at the Department of History of the University of Vienna. His research specializes in the study of medieval Armenian book culture across the Eastern Mediterranean between the 9th and 11th century, with a particular focus on the historical, palaeographical, and philological contextualization of Armenian book production and transmission in conversation with neighboring traditions, including Byzantine Greek and Christian Arabic. Lewis earned his PhD in history from the University of Vienna earlier this year, with an amazing dissertation, I might add, which I hope will be published in due course, and during which he undertook further training in natural language processing, computational linguistics, and automated semantic analysis through machine learning from the University of Oxford. Prior to this, he received his MLit in Middle Eastern History and Arabic in 2020, and MA in Medieval History in 2019 from the University of St. Andrews. His presentation today will discuss his ongoing collaboration with the Mesrop Mashtots Institute of Ancient Manuscripts in the development of a new digital infrastructure for the study and preservation of medieval Armenian manuscript colophons. Lewis, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction, Andy. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to contribute to a seminar series that I enjoy listening to myself so much. So thank you to all of the TeTra team for having me today. And also thank you to all of you in the audience for attending. Let me just share my screen. There we go. If I request that now, that should... Okay. Okay, there we go. Perfect. There we go. Brilliant. Okay. Okay, can everybody see that? Is that working okay if I change the slides? We're all good? Brilliant. Okay, so yes, as Andy said, my contribution for the TeTra seminar today will be primarily through the lens of my current collaboration with the Mesrop Mashtots Institute of Ancient Manuscripts, the Matanaderan, in Yerevan, in the development of a new digital infrastructure for the study and preservation of Armenian manuscript colophons. So, perhaps uniquely, in the tradition of medieval Christian book production, Armenian colophons are particularly abundant in historical information. They were, of course, not only conceived of as a place in the manuscript to record cursory information about its production, but a space where the lived realities of the individuals and communities involved in the manufacture and use of the medieval Armenian codex could be expressed and preserved. Indeed, far from testifying to the memory of a singular or isolated historical Armenian milieu, Armenian colophons preserve a diverse set of perspectives, informed by engagements and exchanges across and between different linguistic, cultural, political, and religious communities connected by the production and use of manuscripts across the Eastern Mediterranean. Currently, the burgeoning field of colophonology, if I can coin that term, is beginning to connect these unique sources across linguistic and disciplinary divides, illustrate the transregional stylistic and rhetorical patterns that they share, and also demonstrate their value as key tools for varying levels of micro and macro historical analysis. Now, I'm sure many of you will be aware, certainly those of you in the audience, of the type of content that's offered by Armenian colophons, but just to give ourselves a little idea of what can be in this material, here we have a colophon attached to a translatio of the relics of the Apostle Paul, penned in Armenian in the late 10th century by a certain Pantaleon. So we're just to read from this in translation here. In the years of Nicephorus, emperor of the Greeks, valiant and virtuous, victorious in battles against the heathens, who smashed the Ismaili yoke, which was upon the necks of Christians. He crushed their jaws and took their impregnable fortresses, especially the great, becoming and praiseworthy Tarsus of Cilicia and Crete, where they had lived constantly lying, cunning rogues. That king made them all servants of the great headship of the Romans, the second after the celestial kingdom. In addition, he brought ornaments from their impure mosques in honor of St. Sophia. And from the order of the second universe holder, my lord, the noble Apusal Hamazat, King of Kings of the great headship of this house of Armenia, he instructed me to follow the paths of a journey to the royal city of Byzantium, to New Rome, to the second Babylon, and to the true Jerusalem, to the most desirable and miraculous peoples of the world, inaccessible and untrodden by enemies to Constantinople, in 414th of this Armenian era. Says, you who read, may you remember the suffering Pantaleon, and that with much work, I extracted sense from the ossuaries of Saint Sophia and translated from Greek into the Armenian language with the assistance of the blessed Yovsep, the glory of God. So we really have so much going on here. We have an Armenian monk and scribe talking about key events in Byzantine politics, talking about his mobility of traveling from Vaspurakan to Constantinople, contemporary diplomatic relations between the Caucasus and the imperial center, Greco-Armenian translation activity in Hagia Sophia, and to go further, the other scribe in this colophon, Yovsep, we think may possibly be the same Yovsep, a Chalcedonian Armenian, who translated the Synaxarion of Constantinople in 991 and who is recorded in the colophon attached to that translation. So you get the idea here. These are very rich resources, certainly that go well beyond the parameters of book production. Of course, this doesn't mean that colophons don't carry drawbacks or challenges as historical tools. Beyond an uneven distribution of surviving exemplars, the variegation of these sources and their immediate local biases, wrapped up as they are in that kind of symbiotic relationship between text and user, of course have to be considered individually when assessing the evidence which they provide. But nonetheless, Armenian colophons are valuable, extremely talkative sources. Thinking now about the treatment and study of colophons in the field of Armenian studies. The study of Armenian colophons has foundationally been conducted within the framework of Armenian language scholarship, particularly at the Matenadaran, which continues to lead the way in this research. This has ranged from providing the first critical editions of Armenian colophons arranged by century to conducting targeted linguistic, onomastic, and historical analysis of their contents. But in the last decade, an increasing number of international research publications have introduced Armenian colophons to a much broader audience. I'm thinking here about the work of David Zakarian, Harutyunyan, who also, I believe, spoke on the seminar series, Emmanuel van Elverdinghe, and Anna Sirinian. And this is great and really promising because it remains the case that despite the value of Armenian colophons for a number of adjacent disciplines and fields, as we've just seen, Byzantine studies, for example, there tends to be very little direct scholarly engagement and use of this material from outside of our field. And even if we look to the field of Armenian studies itself, speaking here about those studies which really foreground or treat colophons as their central object, that output is still relatively modest. I mean, we can point to a handful of key studies, monographs, articles, many of which that have come out in the last kind of 5 to 10 years. So we are in a situation where we have extremely rich material, an abundance of material, but not necessarily a high amount of research output and engagement on the whole. And this is primarily a situation informed by the challenges and limitations of our existing tools and resources, which temper the exploration of this material by both a specialised and wider research audience, and in the end ultimately limit the integration of Armenian colophons as historical tools for the study of the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Because the only way really to access these sources other than a direct archival visit is through the series of editions produced by the Matenadaran throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There are, of course, earlier editions, but these particular editions really represent the state of the art, which I mentioned in the previous slide. And on the slide here on the right, you can see roughly how these editions are arranged, numbered, ordered by date, and you get the text in Armenian. Now, these are fantastic foundational works, but they do present a number of challenges to work with this material. Some of those issues are to do now with age. Foliation is increasingly outdated, and collections are increasingly incomplete. But many of those issues are also to do with editorial choices. Colophons are not always represented in their entirety. The editors of the various editions tended to focus on the sections of text which carried historical or prosopographical information and left out more repetitive sections, so formulaic aspects of the colophon, doxologies, which are really important to actually understanding the text but are missing from the editions. In the Armenian tradition, when text was copied, if there was a colophon attached, the chances are the colophon would also be copied and added to by the subsequent scribe. So we end up with multiple witnesses to the same colophon, which sometimes differ drastically, sometimes minorly over centuries. In these editions, the editors tended to pick one representative example. So we're missing lots of these other witnesses, which add extra information, whether they be formulaic pieces of information or prosopographic or toponymic, and so on and so forth. And many of the other editorial issues tend to be the fact that it masks key linguistic inscribal idiosyncrasies, edits punctuation, which takes us further away from the manuscript and the colophon in its manuscript context, which leads me on to the next point that, of course, not having access to the manuscript in tandem with the edited text means that we can't really get into graphemic idiosyncrasies, mise-en-page, palaeographical features, and such like, which again limits how deeply we can go into this material and the way that we can use it in our own historical analysis. And finally, one of those big issues that I've mentioned already is accessibility. Of course, without a translation or really anything resembling a proper commentary or scholarly apparatus, it's exceptionally hard for anyone outside of the field of Armenian studies to really work with this material. And even then, you have to be working with it for a few years to really get used to the structure and contents of the editions. So, with that in mind, the challenges presented by the only route to access this material and the limitations to scholarly output as a result provided the point of departure for the present project, which I want to speak about today. And that project is designed to meet some of those challenges by developing a new tool. And I felt that if we were going to develop a new tool, this couldn't just be a slightly altered replication of the editions that we had with a translation stuck on the end, but it had to be one which offered genuinely new possibilities, account for many of those aforementioned challenges, make use of new methodologies and technologies, and make that material more accessible and usable. And ultimately, that meant turning to the digital medium to achieve that. And that's not necessarily just my opinion, but that's the last 30 years of scholarship in the field of Armenian studies, specialists working with this material who've constantly stressed the benefits of a new digital corpus. And I think that's best summed up by David Zakarian recently when talking about the potential of a development of a new digital corpus of Armenian colophons, speaks about it as a means to enhance the scholarly endeavors in our field, to streamline research efforts, and significantly bolster our overall efficacy. So since going to the Matanadaran probably nearly a year and a half ago now to propose the project of building a new tool, I've been working to develop a prototype for this new digital corpus, which aims to meet all of those challenges and needs. And that's what I want to share with you now. What you're going to see is fully encoded in TEI XML. The prototype so far comprises a fully tagged and lemmatized transcription of each colophon in classical Armenian, with an accompanying translation, commentary, manuscript image, and manuscript description visualized in an open source user interface. And this is based so far on a test data set of roughly 20 11th century Armenian colophons provided from various archives. So let's have a look what we have so far. Perfect, there we go. So as you can see on the screen, this is the basic user interface that we have so far, with the manuscript on the left, a classical Armenian transcription on the right, an English translation below that, and a commentary at the bottom. This corpus can be navigated through using the drop-down at the top or the slide bar at the bottom. This is arranged in order, in date order so far. Coming to the user interface itself, every manuscript is accompanied by a full manuscript description. So if you're interested in foliation, parchment, etc., that's all there and available to look at. If we look then at the classical Armenian transcription, we have information about the shelf mark and date where we have it at the top. The transcription itself is designed to mirror what we find in the manuscript structurally and in terms of content, really minimal intervention, only expanding abbreviations. This transcription is fully lemmatized and part of speech tagged, so you can click on everything as to look through the corpus. With regarding this issue of having multiple manuscript witnesses to the same colophon, I've also accommodated that in the corpus. As you can see here, we have a colophon of the Armenian martyrdom of St. Eudoxius, and below you'll find the multiple and subsequent witnesses to this colophon, which can be clicked on themselves and viewed as individual texts. So you can view colophons as part of a longer tradition or also on their own individual basis. Returning to the text itself and to the English translation, the translation is designed again to mirror what we find in the Armenian structurally, and this is fully prosopographically and toponymically tagged, so people and places. Any information that we have what colophons and manuscripts they occur in. For example, if you want to know how much Constantinople pops up, you can click on this here, gives you a geolocation, which will be mapped. And you can find other iterations of this occurrence, and it'll take you straight to that example. The commentary at the bottom is also fully tagged to work in tandem with that translation as well. Now, the great thing is that all of this information is gathered in a database format. So we have lists of persons, places. You can navigate through the corpus via this way. So if you want to know how much Michael VII comes up, you can look through and find that, click on the colophon, and it will take you directly to it. The only thing we're missing at the moment that I still need to implement is a list of lemmas. So you will be able to navigate through this corpus entirely linguistically. You want to know what particular adjectives come up, what particular verbs. You are able to do that as part of the tool. So this is what we have so far. But how do we turn this into something usable? How do we get it off of my laptop and into something functional for all of you? Well, we have short and medium-term goals that I've been working with the Matanadaran toward. In the short term, I'm going to be applying for a fairly short-term funded project, 2 to 3 years, to develop this prototype into a proper proof of concept. The output of that will be the first stage of the corpus, and that'll be the digital corpus of Armenian colophons for the 9th to 11th century. This will be published open access with sustainable data storage. It's completely reusable as well. And hopefully we'll be able to achieve that within 3 years' time. The idea is then to take that proof of concept and apply it to a much larger, longer scale project comprising a full research team, combining specialists working with Armenian colophons and in neighboring traditions as well, and applying that proof of concept to expand and publish an entire digital corpus for the 5th to 13th century, again, open access. After that point, who knows? The idea eventually is to try and do this for all the colophons, but that is potentially a lifelong project. So I think that's the next 10 years mapped out. So it's quite enough for now, I think. But the idea is to publish incrementally, so nobody's waiting for years to be able to use this tool. In the long run, this is a really field-wide and interdisciplinary effort. So far, I've been collaborating with key project partners to deliver what you've just seen, working with Kalfa to deliver HTR processing of the corpus, just to speed up parts of the editorial work. I've also been working with the Grigori project in Emmanuel van Elverdinghe in Louvain. They've developed some fantastic tools for text processing in classical Armenian and indeed other Eastern Christian languages. And we've been applying their part of speech tagging and lemmatization, which you saw to this prototype. It's been really successful so far. So we'll continue that work. And primarily it is a project in collaboration with the Matanadaran, and that's facilitated collaboration with our other major archives in Venice, Vienna, and Jerusalem, where the majority of our manuscripts are held. Of course, for the purpose of this project, I've tried to appoint a scientific board and a working group designed to help oversee the project. You can see from the list of names there on the right, we have a mixture of Armenologists, people working particularly with colophons, but also individuals working in neighboring manuscript traditions in Christian Arabic and in Syriac, Dr. Miriam Hjaum and Dr. Ephraim Ishak there, because the aim in the long run is for this committee to form a sustainable working group with the aim of discussing the expansion of this corpus and crucially trying to target areas of cooperation in the field of colophon studies across linguistic divides. Because beyond the fact of just creating a tool here, the project aims for that tool to be leveraged for different targeted purposes. Some of those purposes are specifically designed to meet wider needs and goals in the field of Armenian studies. Primarily, of course, is a digital humanities tool. Classical Armenian in general is a chronically under-resourced language. So the data from this corpus will contribute directly to training text processing tools and HTR engines for classical Armenian and advancing approaches to computational linguistics in our field. It is, of course, conceived as a cultural heritage tool as well. we are in the situation in our field where our major archives, Yerevan, Jerusalem, Vienna, Venice, do not have digital manuscript repositories. So yes, we're only digitizing and publishing a small portion of the manuscript, although the colophons can be quite large. But in the long run, this helps our field-wide goals of eventually digitizing, having everything online, and ensuring long-term manuscript preservation and engagement with cultural heritage as well. I also have designed this corpus to try and function, or to function as a didactic tool. I think we should think of these kind of infrastructure projects not simply just as tool building exercises to be exploited for research, but also as a forum of skills exchange where we can draw on the strength of our combined research environments and also continue to lay foundations for the future of our particular fields. And indeed, I'm hoping that this tool can be leveraged for teaching purposes. Of course, the classic things, palaeography, text editing, language, but also new skills, text encoding, digital manuscript descriptions, which are going to become increasingly important, especially for archival management in the next 10 to 20 years. They're already extremely important. And indeed, as part of this project, I'm going to be offering training at the Manuscripts in these particular skills as well. But of course, crucially, indeed, this is a tool designed to be leveraged for research, but cross-comparative research from within Armenian studies looking out, and from the perspective of adjacent fields looking in. Indeed, one of the key aims of the project is that it acts as a space to conduct foundational, systematic, synchronic and diachronic analysis of various Armenian colophons as a collective, looking at scribes, production centers, linguistics, mise en page, etc., the arrangement of colophons in the manuscript, but doing so in a consciously cross-comparative approach with neighboring manuscript traditions. And so the project in that sense aims to act as a vessel for producing research that articulates the spatio-temporal, material, social-cultural, literary, economic, and legal context behind the creation and circulation of Armenian manuscript, but within shared practices of book production and across shared political, socio-cultural, economic, and legal environments throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. Because by shaping the user experience in this new way with this new tool, it really transforms how Armenologists, and those of you working in adjacent fields, can work with Armenian colophons and use them as meaningful historical tools. What you see on the screen here is the colophon of the Togruk Gospels, which is a 10th century manuscript. On the far left-hand side, you see what it would appear like in the editions that we have at the moment. But when we have the manuscript image, we see that the colophon is actually shaped into a cross. So when we have access to the manuscript image, along with, of course, the transcription and translation, it makes it much easier for us to draw connections to neighboring manuscript traditions. For example, the way in which the Mar Sargis Gospels and Beth Hala are arranged in a similar way. The same can be said for Manuscript manuscript 3723, which is a Gospels produced in Melatini in 1045. What you see on the left-hand side is how it appears in the current editions. But when you actually see the manuscript itself, you can see that the text of the manuscript on the right column is shaped to indicate the start of the colophon with a narrowing of the text, which prompts a change of style and script where the colophon begins. And we see similar things, for example, in these Georgian Gospels from 979, currently housed in the monastery of St. Catherine. So the way in which this tool approaches colophons really opens up these new comparative avenues, not just in terms of the content of manuscript colophons, but through their materiality as well. So by way of brief conclusion, today I hope I've offered a big picture overview of the project and its progress so far, but specifically how this new digital corpus aims to provide a comprehensive research tool designed to support specialized historical, linguistic, codicological, palaeographical, and orthographic investigation of Armenian colophons, to offer unprecedented levels of direct access to their contents, and to render these rich historical sources accessible to scholars working in adjacent fields, engendering an innately cross-comparative investigation of this rich material. And so far, I've really only had the opportunity to discuss this project primarily with an Armenological audience, of course, a few colleagues in adjacent fields, but I'm really looking forward to getting the impressions of perhaps a broader audience today, those of you working in neighboring manuscript traditions. And so I'm really looking forward to getting your thoughts on that. So thank you for your time and thank you for listening. There we go. Is that right? Okay, I'm not sharing anymore. Lovely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lewis, for this impressive tour of the corpus of Armenian colophons and for giving us here at TeTra a taste of all the exciting future plans and developments and possibilities for consultation and comparison. I am very pleased to now open the floor for questions. So please feel free either to raise your virtual hand or indeed to write a question in the chat. And I am happy to give the floor first to Christopher Sprecher for the first question. Please.
Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you so much, Lewis, for a fantastic presentation. I'm super excited about the work, and I hope all the funding comes through for it. I've got lots of things to just kind of wrote, and I know I'll see you later next week, but I think here just first, I love the idea of sort of colophonology. I guess yišatakaran. We can also have that as like a nice neologism in Armenian.
Right.
But a few things. I'm just wondering. One thing, a quick sort of question in terms of layout. Is there any plan, or have you thought of perhaps enabling side-by-side panes where people could compare colophons? I know that for me, that's the first thing I thought. If I have multiple witnesses to the text, if I want to actually kind of dig into the details of variant readings, that would be a great way to kind of have it sort of easily visible. And then, so that's a comment you can talk about. I was wondering if you've been in touch with anyone from Jerusalem, if you have contacts in the Armenian Patriarchate for the library there. If not, I and others do, so feel free to reach out on that. Also, with Himmel, because I was just teaching Armenian there this summer, they've got a big team and they'd be really happy to help with all this kind of stuff, especially as you were saying, the initial scope of the project is to kind of look more at the colophons and digitizing that, whereas they're really into going someplace with portable stuff and digitizing everything. So that'd be a great sort of work partner to kind of get the other half of the package done at the same time. And then just wondering also with the descriptive markers, kind of tying into your last point, which was nice. Pulling out the importance of the material culture of the manuscripts, design elements, artistic elements. How I imagine it's not a question of if, but rather how these will be sort of encoded into the database where people could look for that. So whether there's certain design features or color or art or like that, because I could see that'd be something that'd be really interesting for people, especially in like material culture studies, art history, looking at representations of animals or crosses that they might not know about because it's in a colophon. It's a lot, but thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So that's great. So I'm just trying to remember all those questions there. So in terms of user experience, I think was the first question. Yeah, we are going to, I'm currently working with the Austrian Centre for Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage to implement some of this stuff. So we're kind of working steadily, especially since we've not got full funding yet. But the idea is long-term to have a multi-image viewer so you can compare indeed two manuscripts next to each other or two texts next to each other, however you wish to do it. You could have two manuscripts in the text there as well. So that is a plan. But thank you for asking for that. In terms of other archives, yeah, Jerusalem have been really supportive. So Hierarchak working there has been fantastic. And the increased collaboration from the Matanadaran between Jerusalem, Venice, and Vienna has also really helped to centralize a lot of this work. In terms of infrastructure as well, providing scanners for these archives too, it makes the work a lot easier and it allows various librarians at different archives, Venice, Jerusalem, to be able to do this kind of work and digitize things. So that's been great working with them. And the reason I've focused on the, shall we say, the big four archives, Yerevan, Jerusalem, Vienna, and Venice so far, is because they don't have these digital manuscript repositories, whereas Himmel does, the BNF does, Oxford does. I've been talking to the Bodleian as well about this, but because their manuscript repositories are IIIF compliant, it makes it way easier for me to be able to connect my work to what they're doing already and bring the manuscript images from there. But I do need to get in touch with Annie Shahinian at Himmel actually to talk to them about this project. But I'm still just, because we're waiting for funding, bit by bit. But yes, absolutely. So eventually we want obviously to cover things that go beyond these four main archives. But for now, that's been the centrality of the work. And in terms of representing material images within the text. Yeah, so the plan is eventually to carry out a layout analysis on the manuscript page, and that will support descriptive encoding of different images that come up in the corpus. So that's something we want to work to long term. In the moment, it's very text focused, of course, but eventually we want to be able to do that. So if you are looking for colophons, you know, that are arranged in a certain way, maybe they have a cross on them, maybe they're prompted by red ink, maybe they're prompted by a particular design on the manuscript, we're also going to be able to encode that long term as well. But that'll be a lot further down the line just while we build this up. But I think this is the sense of trying to do it bit by bit.
Yeah.
I want it to kind of be full, each section, rather than trying to do everything in a thin way and then eventually work on other stuff. So I think building up sort of from the 9th century onward to have these units that people can use effectively as much as possible.
Yeah, it's also just on the script too, because I thought, especially in the
Right.
last slide you had with the Great Georgian example, which is of stuff that I've worked with too, also.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a great example, that the Sinai Georgian one that you had, because it has like, this shows the different Georgian scripts coming into use. And
like
I mean,
you talked about,
yeah, and so I know, like in Armenian, we don't necessarily have like different scripts, that you have texts that are sort of like all, and like yišatakaran, and then you have the other ones that come in sort of like different case and whatnot. So that could be interesting to kind of see, like what's the sort of visual effect of the script kind of coming about. So all of these fine details, but yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thanks for the questions. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. For the next question, I'm happy to turn to Andy.
Thank you very much, Lewis. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm also happy that I got to, because you gave a talk also about your work on in Yerevan, but then I was less able to pay attention because I had to give a talk after you. So I'm really happy that this happened. Really exciting work. I mean, this is going to be I say when this is done, but this is going to be, well, you said lifelong work, but already, I mean, with these, what was it, 20 examples, it's very exciting. No, my question is, well, you mentioned sort of, you gave a lot of examples where it's, and just Christopher raised it now just as well, where you have these connections between other traditions. In terms of technological perspective, or how are you going to, because there are other databases, I guess, that are starting to be made for these traditions, from a technological perspective, are these made in the same way, and are you going to connect them in some way? I mean, in terms of from the, what's the right word for this? I guess programming perspective. I'm really not technologically.
Well, it really, I mean, it really depends on what other available tools we have. So I was talking to the Bodleian, for example, and they have a digital manuscript repository, the digital Bodleian, and they just happen to also encode the text alongside the manuscript. So in the same way that I am in TEI XML. And so we've already been talking about, as I work through the colophons here, providing them with transcriptions, and they can link to my resource, and I can link to manuscript images in their resource. So when they're constructed in that way, the BNF is very similar. It makes it really easy to connect to these other databases online. And also prosopographical work. Emmanuel van Elverdinghe is doing some really interesting prosopographical database work with the colophons at the moment. So we're hoping again to integrate these things together. But this is the sense of trying to get more of a working group together that goes beyond Armenian studies, because of course I'm only going to be aware of these things so much as we speak to each other across fields, and things are pointed out that maybe we don't know about before, etc. We put people in contact, and it makes it easier, because whilst the encoding of these tools is not necessarily always uniform, it allows for a certain degree of interoperability, which allows for connection with other fields. But as much as that is also technological, a big part of that is communication based. So understanding what other people are doing and what other plans there are, because of course people can be doing stuff right now that aren't necessarily in the open or being spoken about future plans. So yeah, it's a sort of two-pronged thing where we look for the technology, but also speaking to each other as well to achieve that. So yeah.
Yeah. Word of mouth is very much one of them. And so thank you very much for giving this talk in our seminar. Thanks.
There also is a question by Dan.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, and we're very much looking forward to see this project developed. So I'm holding all my fingers crossed for your applications that are gonna come up soon. My question would be: so obviously the very thing of producing a database and digital database fully lemmatized and with images, and as you responded to Christopher, with the ability to put them one by side to one another for comparisons is a gain in itself. My curiosity is whether your project proposes to also go a bit in and connect it into the historical context of these manuscripts and of these colophons, and dig a bit further in any way, or like other projects that work on colophons do, or whether the way you devise the project is to stick to its guns and produce the database and the digitizations in the way that you described. I'm just curious how you're thinking about this.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, I think long term this project will develop in different directions that I'm not necessarily anticipating for at the moment. I think a big question mark over the whole thing is what's a colophon? And that varies from tradition to tradition as well. And a big part of this project is actually theorizing that and how we define those parameters and exactly what should be included in the corpus, what shouldn't be included, how that's different between traditions. So while I think, whilst I said the corpus itself is designed as the tool, getting project funding and time to be able to then leverage that tool is also a key part of the project. So going into historical context, looking at it from different perspectives, and there's a variety of ways you can look at it, whether it's material, contextual, content, historical, etc. But yeah, using that really to be leveraged, because I don't want it to be a tool for tool's sake, but to use these projects as space for research as well, because I think that's also crucial in terms of framing this material and also helping people who are less familiar with the material to work with it. Because if we have studies which accompany it, which theorize about it, then that's going to make that even easier to make these connections further in different fields as well. So it's definitely a two-pronged thing where we have the tool plus the historical meat of the project as well. Yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned that there are problems. I'm gonna go on with one more, if that's possible, Marion, before David. You mentioned that there is the question of what is a colophon. What would extreme cases look like?
Well, I suppose it's that line between paratext and chronicle, right? Because I mean, the thing we saw earlier, I mean, it's full historical information. As a working rule, I've actually been applying a rough framework that Miriam Helm and Peter Tarish used to look at Christian Arabic colophons, which is to say a colophon is produced by someone involved in the production or use of the manuscript, and that it has to contain at least one piece of information about its production or use or circulation. So that provides a rough rule of thumb in terms of what can be included and what can't. But when you get to the point of having 5-6 folio long colophons, the line of and is colophon, you could be really meta about, is colophon the right term as well for these kind of things? Do they go beyond what we might think a colophon is in terms of a paratext in a manuscript? So there's a lot of theorizing.
And would you go on the side of erring by inclusion or erring by leaving out? This is a question.
Yeah, yes. No, it's a good question. I'd rather try to include more than I leave out for now. It's easier to reduce than to expand.
I agree.
Later on.
Very interesting.
So I think, yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Next, I'd like to give the floor to David, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your presentation, Luis. I'm eagerly waiting for that database because it's very difficult to access colophons from Romania. I was interested in the problem of the language of the colophons. Mm-hmm. When I wrote my PhD thesis, I studied colophons from 12th and 13th centuries, and I was interested to find linguistical influences from the West which penetrated into the Armenian language. And for example, in the 13th century, we have a gap of 7 decades when there is no chronicle and no history. Until Sâmbați Parapet, basically, we don't have access to anything from any, let's say, literary production from Cilicia. But we have colophons, and we see how the Armenians from Cilicia adopted Latin terms, like, for example, basage, which is the translation from passagium, And I was thinking about this because you also know Hachik's book about the language of the colophons. Yeah. Maybe do you want to put like some notes in the translations where you have, for example, Basajan, and you know that this is the first time when we have this word in Armenian? Because there could, I think, Latin penetrations and Latin influences in Armenian can be seen in colophons. Absolutely. And later in chronicles and histories.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that goes for other languages as well. I mean, this is where there's such great resources. And this is also the sense of trying not to edit the text too much, because we want to leave them as they are in the manuscript. And that therefore reflects important linguistic features of the colophon and its contents as well. So hence why we're doing that. Yes, I mean, this is hopefully the utility of the digital corpus is that it allows for you to view the text through lots of different layers, which you maybe can't do in book form in this case. And so including things alongside the lemmatization and the part speech tagging in terms of linguistic analysis and noting of the colophons would absolutely be an intended part of the project to help draw people's attention to these things in the same way that we might draw attention to similar issues of mise en page as well. So it's equally important looking at linguistically, and Kachik's obviously done a lot of amazing work on that already. So some of that's incorporating existing research, referring to that research, bringing new material in. But this is where eventually, of course, it becomes, like I said, a more field-wide and interdisciplinary thing, because you need lots of eyes on this material to pick up stuff like that, to be able to do it. But we certainly have the capacity to be able to track linguistic change, linguistic iterances like that. So yeah, absolutely, that would hopefully be part of the plan as well. And it's great because I think whenever I'm able to talk about the project, somebody always brings up different stuff. So it gets added to the list of things that are going to be included, which is why I love talking about that so much. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We still have time for a few more questions. And I think this might be a good moment to turn to the chat for that. There is a slightly broader question by Travis. Travis, would you like to read it out yourself?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I went to the scriptorium at the Matadaran and to the one at Ishmerazin and asked about Hermetic text in Armenian, which we know existed, but they didn't know of any. And so I was wondering where I could find or access those, and also if there were any texts that treat early heterodox forms of Armenian Christianity that might have disappeared into history. So I know that's also a broad question, as she said.
Yeah, I might defer that to the audience if anyone has any ideas, because it's not really my thing, that. So I don't know if anyone has any other suggestions. I'd have to go away and have a look, actually, because off the top of my head, I don't know. Does anyone else? Any ideas?
We know that they existed.
Yeah, no,
Hermetic texts in Armenian. So
yeah,
I figured if I went to scriptoriums in Armenia, surely they could show me something.
yeah. No, yeah, sorry I can't be of more help with that. But
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That might be something left to discover for later. And perhaps we can now turn to the question of Maria Thomas in the chat. Maria, could I give the floor to you to read your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the fascinating paper, Lewis. My question was about the layout of the colophons in these Armenian manuscripts, and you showed us some examples of the cross layout. And I was wondering, what are the other perhaps types of layouts that you encounter in these manuscripts, and how common is the cross layout itself? Because I'm working with a Syriac manuscript from 12th century Jerusalem that has a very interesting cross layout, and I couldn't find anything similar in the Syriac milieu. So I was wondering, what it is like in Armenian manuscripts, and if this could be a part of the product of cultural contacts between the two.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I myself don't quite fully have a sense of all the different possible layouts, because I'm starting from the editions themselves as well. So until it's only when I get manuscript images that you see something in the edition that looks totally different in the manuscript. So we do have other examples of crosses, but we've also got kind of colophons in square, and they tend to be interlaced almost like rope-like design around the colophon. So we have other examples of that in different traditions as well. And we have colophons that are laid out like acrostics with the scribe's name, Johannes, down the side, with the colophon arranged in that way. So there's tons of different designs, whether that's shaping the text or framing the text in different colors and such like. So there is a multitude of different designs. And this is the sense of having the manuscript image too, because it totally changes the connections you can make in the corpus, basically, that you could look at content so far, maybe similar formulaic work, and a lot of that work's been done by Emmanuel van Elverdinghe and Anna Sirinian. They've looked at, say, formulaic contents within the colophons, similar scribal expressions, but this question of comparing the mise en page is really important, and Kachik is started a lot of important work on that as well, moving forward, because this is where we can make key connections that we can't currently do because we can't sit these things next to each other. So yeah, loads of different patterns and shapes and things which will become increasingly apparent as I'm able to work through the corpus. But it's a great question. And I remember you showed me the labyrinth colophon, so that stuck with me as well. So I have a note of that.
Christopher, please.
Yes, thanks again, since we have a bit of time. Just piggybacking on what Maria was just saying too, I think with layout, I think is just such an important thing, especially because you also remember, Lewis, I had worked at the end of the project in Heidelberg. This might be something familiar to people here. They had the big SFB project for 12 years, material text cultures, and I had translated their final volume from German into English, which is also available open access online with De Gruyter, Theory of Material Text Culture. So it's really interesting, like layout stuff, which would be like good to reference. But also there, you may remember also from the paper I gave at the multilinguality conference here, where it wasn't a main point that I mentioned there, but in this context, it's important, where in the Georgian manuscripts I was looking at, ones that were sort of solidly in a Christian kind of cultural environment, or like aimed at a more Christian audience, were sort of following typical Byzantine layout patterns. So for example, the text was in 2 columns, everything you would be expecting from a typical sort of gospel manuscript. And then there's that fantastic version of a gospel written in Turkish, but in Georgian letters, fully designed and laid out like a Quran. So on the edge, it's all like sort of typical sort of floral decorations that you find on typical sort of Persianate manuscripts. And instead of being in 2 columns, it's in single lines across, like you find in typical sort of Quran style. So it's everything you'd be expecting from an Islamic culture with a Christian content. And again, if you just have sort of a little statement in a book, like you're like, gospel in Turkish, but with Georgian letters, you're not going to know anything about this really important kind of cultural information of the layout. So my thing is like layout should be a big part of whatever comes into the database. So that's the comment. The question is tying into something that I think maybe Dan had said, or someone else about where's where do we draw the line with the colophons? I think here it's interesting because I was just doing a quick check on sort of Wiktionary during your talk. What languages have their own words for colophon rather than just a loan word? There's not many. even Georgian. I mean, you can say andertsi, which is itself kind of an Armenian loan word from like Persian, but they usually just say koloponi. But like Japanese and Chinese, they have distinct kind of words that kind of reflect their traditions here. And this whole notion of a place of remembrance, which I think is really great to kind of pull out. There's a lot of things you can remember besides just where and when I made this sort of copy. So if there's a way in sort of marking, like in a search format, for me as someone who looks a lot at like text and like really does like close readings of stuff, I would think it'd be interesting to see, here's a colophon, which is sort of what I might call like a bare bones colophon. Like, I, the sinful monk so-and-so, copied this manuscript in this monastery in this year, please pray for me. Versus, someone who says, and by the way, the Mongols came in this year and they did all this kind of stuff, or something completely different about my mother that has nothing to do with the text or the sort of concrete specifics of the copying act, which comes up in the different colophons that we see in the Armenian tradition. And to be able to kind of search for that in terms of the colophon content, like what is it? Is it historical? Is it like descriptive of the manuscript process? Is it derivative, like the the author's kind of own life. I don't know how you would find like a good way to sort of mark that, but I think that could also be something that would be very useful to me and other scholars. So
absolutely,
another feature request.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm writing everything down as you speak. Yeah, no, I mean, at the moment in Armenian, and you're just speaking from that perspective, there's the distinction between, you know, the main colophon and then other colophons. And so that's a distinction that's kind of a working system at the moment. But I think you can go much deeper into that in terms of, looking at what the scribe's trying to achieve, where it is in the manuscript, again, going back into materiality and other things. So I do think the fun thing about the project is that it's not just the tool building, but it provides that space to have these exact conversations. And people bring their perspectives from different traditions. And if you look at the kind of work that's been done with the recent volume with George Karaz, etc., of colophons, this is a great example of pulling colophons from all over the place and seeing how they sit next to each other. So yeah, again, having that kind of integrative approach and theorized approach is also, I think, part of the future plan and the promise of the project as well, for sure. So yeah, but that's great. I'm writing everything, all the requests. That's good. Thank you.
For the next question, we will turn back to Andy.
Yeah, maybe something else. Well, maybe not a request so much. One thing that hasn't come up is dating eras. And we know, of course, in the Armenian tradition, it's always you use the Armenian era. Actually, I don't know of a colophon that uses other dating systems. Do these exist? And how have you thought about how to sort of index those or make those kind of things searchable that you can sort of figure out? Because we know, for example, there's from the Syriac side, there was an article by Ulrich Kaufhold, I think, saying that these kind of the Christian era is introducing colophons in the 12th century. Have you sort of thought about how to approach this from the Armenian side through your platform?
Yeah, so I mean, there's tons of different dating systems in the colophons. We've got one example, which is Matanadaran 988, which is from 1045, and it has Armenian era, Byzantine indiction, rule of the Byzantine emperor, Dionysian cycles as well. So there's all kinds of things, basically, in terms of dating systems. I haven't done this in the prototype yet, but the idea is that we're also going to mark up different dates, because you do then start to approach the issue of how you arrange the corpus in terms of when the colophon is dated versus when the manuscript is dated, because often we have colophons which only survive in later manuscripts. So at the moment, because it's manuscript focused, we're going on the date of the manuscript rather than necessarily the colophon that may be in the manuscript. But in the long term, we want to encode all the dating and all the different types of dating, so you can also navigate via that direction as well. So you can look up different dating systems or indeed dates of colophons too. So this is something that we'll have to contend with, because an important part of the colophon is the dates, which we're very fortunate to have a lot of in the Armenian tradition. But that means, loads of different types of dating and stuff, which is super interesting. And again, you've got this interconnectivity which plays into the whole thing. So yeah, that's something within the project as well.
Wonderful, thanks.
And if there are no further questions, I should like to thank all of you for your presence, for your questions, and most of all, our speaker, Lewis, for guiding us so expertly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone for listening as well.